It couldn't have been more obvious. So when you pull in, most times if you look up the address, it'll tell you 1200 Old Trenton Road, which brings you here. And you can go around either side of it. There's a driveway that goes all the way around. You can park in the east student parking lot or the west. It really doesn't matter which one. What you're looking for is the center area, which is the big quad. If you're looking for the business building, that's where funeral services were based over here, if you are familiar with it. So you go into the quad, and over here in the student center is basically where the testing center is. If you go into this building here and ask security, they'll send you up to the second floor and send you around to the testing center. Actually, technically it's on the library side of it, but it's easiest to get into. I guess it is. It's just as easy to go on the library side, but it's on the second floor, and you just follow the signs for the testing center. It'll take you right there. Try to get there 45 minutes to an hour early just to give yourself time to get there. You don't want to show up late. You don't know what traffic's going to be like. I mean, it's you're coming from a distance, so it's better to show up a little bit early and sit down at the student center and have a cup of coffee and review your notes or whatever. So let me get into my slides here. All right. So you guys did not see me vaping here. That's for sure. I'm not even worried about the school. I'm worried about my wife finding out that's doing this in the house. Anyhow, all right. So New Jersey Prudence Review, right? Also known as the state board exam. Um, LOL. Yeah. Yeah. Maybe you're married as well. It's one of those deals that you know, something something came up, but I can't read it. I don't know. Why is that saying direct message? I don't want to do that. Yeah, so oh okay, I actually directly replied to. Yeah, I see that. Yeah. All right, no big deal. Know how Zoom works. Well, give it time. You'll get used to it. It's one of those things that I think we've all come to grips with over the past 4.5 years or however long it's been. We're going on 5 years now, aren't we? Um, the shoot. All right, so from what my understanding has always been, and they don't tell us a lot about it, it's just like the national. Like the national, they'll give us a breakdown of, okay, you have so many questions on this, so many questions on this, so many questions on this, so many questions on this. The JP exams tends to change, although I know that they had a bunch of people in from the conference to write questions for it. What that means for it, I don't know because they won't be rolled out initially, but I would guess that they make them. My guess would be they're more difficult if they're written by somebody who is not a professional question writer, but somebody who has that type of a background, somebody who's done volunteer their time to write questions 5 or 6 times or something like that, you know. And any question you look at, remember this the breakdown of a question. You have the stem of it, there's an answer, and then there's three distractors, right? And it's a matter of how many of those distractors can you mark off? Can you make it a 50-50 shot? Do you know it straight out? Is it down where you're looking at it and you're like, I don't know out of all four of these? I mean, if so, it's not a bad idea. Don't panic on one question, just flag it and come back to it. Sometimes it's best to just do that and let your mind just work on something else. It may come back to you in the meantime. And I've always found when taking tests, the faster you take it, I'm not saying go in there and take fast tests. And I'm not saying if you're slow at taking tests, you're bad at it. I'm not saying anything along those lines. All I'm saying is the first guess that you make tends to be the correct one, right? Like, whenever I took tests, I just went through and the first answer that popped into my head, I went with, and I really tried not to change them. Occasionally, maybe I would change one if something popped into my head, and I said, maybe whatever, right? But they generally say if you go back, let's say you flag 30 questions, right? That's a lot, but and you go back and you change 20 of those questions. They say like 15 of them were probably correct already. I'm making those numbers up. I'm just giving an example. But they say that your first impulse tends to be the correct one. That's not a universal thing. There's not an exact science to it. I'm just telling you what the standard feeling is on test taking in general. So the JP review is all the wonderful statutes and regulations in the state of New Jersey. Um, and if you remember, statutes, and they're not statues, it's statutes, are the ones that you'll see in JSA, and the AC is administrative code. So statutes annotated administrative code. You don't need to know those exact definitions or anything like that. It's just the idea that a statute comes down from the legislative body, right? Whereas an administrative code would come from the state board. Senate, the state Senate is not going to sit there and argue over whether or not you should have two troll cars in a prep room and a pair of scissors, and you should also have, whatever, wherever you keep your embalming fluid. It has to have this type. Like they don't get into the minutia of it. They set large, general standards that have to be followed. What is, the licensing recommendations? Like, what do you have to do to get licensed in the state? Can you eat food in a funeral home? That was changed at the statutory level. That was not changed by the administrative code. That was changed by the statutes. Um, versus again administrative code that deals with the minutia of everyday stuff with funeral service. Should we change this law that says you have to have the manager's name in your advertising and the license number? Yeah, that's something that the Senate's not concerned about. They leave that to the administrative body, the state board, and they allow them to sort that stuff out. So when you look at the two sets, and that link that I put in there will give you two sets. It actually gives you three. It gives you Uniform Enforcement Code, which is the Uniform Enforcement Code. Just says everything is supposed to be done across the books. It's done the same. It doesn't matter if you're running a funeral home or an accounting business or a hair salon or anything. All of the codes are sort of enforced the same way. And that's not terribly important, but those are the three links that are on there, and the two that you really need to focus on. They said the statute and the administrative code. You're going to find the statute is much shorter. It's something like 35 pages. I'm making that number up, and the administrative code is something like 92 pages. Back when I was a student, it came in a small little white book. I might even still have a copy of it somewhere around here. And it was something like 280 pages. It was just same amount of information. It was just a smaller book, so pages were smaller, but it was still a bear to go through and read that. Now this slide right here, this is just for reference purposes for you guys. This is a good one. Again, all of these slides for this, like I said, I'll put this up onto our YouTube page, and this is one of the only things I'll make that is just open to the public. So if you go to it, you can watch it if you want to, or download it or whatever. But this is a good one to just hold on to. If you have a question down the road, where did this come from? Where can we look up something about corporate names? Oh, okay, just put that into Google and it should bring it up for you. What to do about what do medical examiners do? What's the deal with pre-paying funerals? Like, and most of this stuff, but it's good to hold on to it for that reason. Now, that being said, you do not need to remember these numbers. Like you're not going to see a question that says, well, what's it say in NJSA 26? Like you're not going to see something like that. This is just there for reference. This is where all this stuff is taken from. All right, keep in mind the difference between these things. Like a license for an individual, certificate of registration is for the building. And there's different requirements for both, and we'll go over both of them. And like I said, a lot of the stuff I leave blank, and a lot of the stuff, like if I'm teaching laws, rules, and regs, I have all the answers in front of me, and I can tell you exactly how long you have to renew your license and things like that. I intentionally leave all of that off of here to make you look it up on your own. And it's good to go in and look these things up. And by looking them up, it doesn't mean that you know everything about, on that's going to be in the test. It's just, it helps you memorize it. Yeah.
Professor Daly, can I add something that
Yeah.
you mentioned in laws, rules, and regs that always helped me is that um, renewing a funeral director's license in the odd years because you've never met a funeral director that isn't a little odd.
And yeah, thank you. And that
That's
is
me.
it's it helps you remember it, doesn't it? And we'll come to that, but that's a really good point. That's always the way that I remember it. I remember it when I've taken the test. Like every funeral director I know is an oddball. That they get their credits on odd years. You know, it makes sense. You know, a death certificate and a burial permit, you know. And again, the lines have been blurred on this because, and in a good way, because of EDRS. It used to be you would get a death certificate, a doctor would issue it, or the hospital or nurse or whomever, right? You would take that. If the doctor didn't sign it, you would take it to the doctor. They would sign it. They would put a manner of death on it. You would sign it. You would get the vital statistic information. You would take it to the registrar of vital statistics, a government official who would look it over and issue you a burial permit, meaning everything's good, right? That's what it is. Well, we've blurred the lines on that one in that everything just goes into EDRS and you just print out burial permits right away. But remember, the general point of a death certificate is to collect all of those vital statistics, which are used by the state and the nation to determine, the average age of death and a whole bunch of other factors. Um, it's all still used for those purposes, and it's all still very important. But for the funeral director, that's what it was. Yes, we were in charge of collecting that data, but we didn't get a burial permit until that death certificate was properly filed. And so today, yes, it has to be properly filed, but you could print a death certificate, or I'm sorry, excuse me, you could print a burial permit right away. Even if there was something wrong with the death certificate and it like gets kicked back or something like that, there's an issue down the road. Whereas it was a little tougher to do something like that when it was the olden days and you would actually had to hand in one piece of paper to get the other. And a burial permit versus a transit permit. Remember, that's just a magical thing that happens by clicking a button. You go into EDRS, you put in the person's name, their date of birth, and their place of birth, their parents' information, all that good stuff, and you print up a burial permit. And I'm sorry, you're going to print a burial permit, but you're shipping the person to California. Well, what do? You click a button on there which says it's transportation by common carrier. Yes, and you put that information in, and it magically becomes a transit permit. I've always felt, I'm glad there's not, because I'm a small government type of guy, but I've always felt there should be more to that. Like, yeah, you could magically turn that into a transit permit and take a body and put it onto a plane with, 200 people on it, or however many people ride on a plane. It always seemed a little off to me. I don't know. It seemed like it was open for something awry to happen. No, not what, praise the Lord, it hasn't, as far as I know, but I've always felt there should be more to that. But that's the way that you get a transport permit. You magically convert it from a burial permit or a disposition permit into a transit permit. And when that gets to where it's going, it can still be used as a burial permit or a disposition permit. You can do it with it whatever you would like because everything has been approved here in New Jersey if the burial or cremation or whatever is being done out in, let's say, California. And likewise, the same is true coming into New Jersey, a foreign, quote unquote, foreign burial permit, which has become a transit permit if somebody's being shipped up from Florida or something like that. That transit permit becomes a burial permit to you and it works on your end. And even if it's foreign and out of the country, that is sufficient. So what is a license required for? It's required for all this good stuff. It is required to, oh, I lost everybody. Hold on. There we go. It's required to arrange and pre-arrange. You can't do pre-arrangements without a license. You can't arrange without a license. Now, if you're an intern, you're allowed to do it under the supervision of a preceptor, the same way you're allowed to embalm under the supervision of a preceptor. They should at least be available. They shouldn't be in Florida sitting on a beach somewhere or something like that. They should be in the building or on the premise or something along those lines. To sign a DC, you need a funeral director's license to sign a death certificate. And years ago, I guess you could have forged somebody's name, but today it's not. I mean, you had to get into, I guess you could if you knew their passwords or whatever, but it's all done on EDRS, but you're still signing that death certificate with your license number. To embalm, again, unless you're an intern, you need a license at a point of disposition. This was relaxed for a period of time during the pandemic, but they've sort of clamped back down on that. I doubt there'll be any questions about the pandemic. I'm doubting it, but I can't say for sure, you know. Supervised visitation, dress, casket, to do a removal. No, of course not. You can do all of that. My wife can do all of that. She works out of the funeral home. She's overseen visitations and viewings and whatnot. She's very good at it. She knows exactly what to do, but she's not licensed, and you're absolutely allowed to do it. A lot of funeral homes will hire like, I don't know, an older guy who's retired and doesn't want to just sit around and stare at the walls, and he'll go and happily work like a 7 to 9 and chit chat with people at the door and whatever, and everybody's happy. It's good, but you don't have to be licensed to do that. Same is true if you take a cremated remains, and let's say you have a service at the funeral home, and you're going to leave the funeral home. Let's say you have a calling time at the funeral home, and then you have a whole mass for these cremated remains. Then you're taking a whole funeral procession out to the cemetery. Do you need a license? No, because the disposition happened when the cremation was done. Now, it's not to say those ashes, cremated remains, cremains, whatever you want to call them, doesn't mean they don't have great intrinsic value and great legal value as well. Especially if you just took cremated remains to somebody and threw them in the garbage or something, right? Like there would be hell to pay for that, and rightfully so. But because it is not a dead human body in the eyes of the law, a non-licensee can direct the whole thing. This is what, Madison, you were mentioning. This is what I always say, the license renewal, and this is the easy way to remember it. Biennial is it's done biennially for both the funeral home and for the individually. On even years, the funeral home, and on odd years is for the personnel, it's for the people. And I picked this picture, I found it online. Like, what a bunch of weirdos. I have no idea what's going on with this, but they look like odd people. If you saw them from a distance, you're like, yeah, they're that there's something odd going on there. And so yeah, think of those odd people. If they ask you what year do you do it, it's on those odd years. And 23, 25, 27, whereas, again, funeral home be 24, 26, 28, 30, etc. Those renewal expectations, right? The continuing ed, we'll talk about that in a bit. There's 10 credits of it. Now, a license relapse, and we'll talk about that. If you let your license lapse, and then if it renewal of that license, what are the requirements for it? And there are time issues. So I have a whole slide set out on this. We'll talk about this one just a bit, but that's one that is good to know because they did change that back in 2019. So again, I have a lot of these slides on here new for 2019 because that was the last time that the laws were changed. And by now, you'll definitely be seeing this. They went through what was called a sundown period, wherein laws and such are only good for so long. You don't want a law in the books from 1893 or something. So every 7 years or so, they go through, I think it's 7 years, and they go through into sunset laws where they review everything and they go, should it be updated? Should it not? In 2019, they did that. According to this, and there'll be other ones that will come to, pre-need providers must monitor attendance and ensure completion of lessons. So if you've been to any of the state associations, continuing ed, they'll put a badge on you, and every time you go in or out, they scan that badge. And if you're out for more than 10 minutes, they don't give you credit for it, which kind of stinks because if you go out and you have to take a phone call or a family's calling that's being crazy, it's a bummer, but it is what it is. And then the CEU instructor must maintain those records for 5 years. And none of you are probably CEU instructors yet. Maybe someday you'll go on to become one. I don't know. I think it's silly to test you on it, but that could very well pop up on the test. How long are you supposed to hold on to? And keep that in mind. Any piece of paper at the funeral home, whether that be on your behalf or something like this, or the CEU instructor holding on to your record, how long? What are the time frames involved with that? So an inactive license, they did away with this altogether in 2019. Inactive licenses are gone. It used to be you could have grandpa was started the funeral home in 1932, and he still wants to kick around and have his name listed and all this stuff, but he doesn't do it. He doesn't make arrangements or embalm, or he just shows up or whatever. They just said, no, that's confusing to the public. Just, it's fine. Just, he could still show up and hang out, but just let the license go. And so that's what they did. As of June 2019, no more licenses. And if you had an inactive license, like you didn't need to get CEUs or anything like that, but you couldn't be a manager of a funeral home. You really weren't supposed to be doing anything at a funeral home. It was just a way to, I guess, give you a piece of paper to hang up on the wall is really what it came down to. And they sort of just did away with that. So a license lapse. If your license lapse, and the big deal, the big number was 5 years. That's what they always tied it to, is 5 years. And the idea being that if you were gone for 5 years, then you would have to come back and make up all the hours and pay all the extra backlog of the amount that you would have owed for re-upping your license over those licensing periods, pay all of that, make it good. But New Jersey now they said, okay, well, if you're out for 5 years, you only had to pay one licensing cycle and you only need to get this licensing cycle's worth of credits and the one that you're in. So instead of having going back, let's say you're out for the full 5 years, you don't have to get 25 hours of continuing ed to be reconsidered as a licensee. You can go out and just get the 10 from the previous licensing cycle, and whatever licensing cycle you're in, you would need to have 10 by the time that licensing cycle ended. You'd need an additional 10. So you would need a total of 20 for that period of time. Does that make sense, everyone? It's a weird one. It's weird in that they really work with the minutia on that one. And
I'm sorry, would you be able to explain that one more time?
yeah, sure. The It's the basic idea that years ago, before 2019, if your license had lapsed, life gets in the way, you have a kid, you join the military, you decide you don't want to be a funeral director anymore, whatever, and you leave. There was a 5 year marking point that changed what you had to do when you came back. Up to 5 years, they said that you had to go back and do all the delinquent continuing ed hours, which would, at 5 years, would work out to 25, being 10 per licensing cycle. So it'd be 2.5 licensing cycles, which would work out 10 per and then the five. Pay all extra fees. So whatever it costs to renew your license, and I'm blanking on that right now, you would have to pay that twice, 2.5 times actually. And you would then all past years you would have to reinstate the fee and you would have to verify your employment during that time to prove you weren't like in jail. They did away with all of that. They just said, look, fine, if you're up to 5 years, all you have to do is go back to the previous licensing cycle. So this is 2013, right? Or excuse me, this is 2023. Let's say I left funeral service in 2018, right? In 2023, I decided, well, I'd rather go back and become a funeral director again. I'd had to go back and get the licensing, or I'm sorry, the continuing ed from this past licensing period, meaning 10, uh, um, 10 credits. I wouldn't have to get 25. I had also had to get the continuing ed that is required of the current licensing cycle that I'm in. So if I did this right now, I'd have to get an additional 10 credits by March, basically. However, if I waited until March and it was still within that 5 years, let's say it was March, let's say it was, I'll make it easy, so April 5th, right? And I've been out for 5 years at that point. I would have to get the licensing from, I would have to get the 10 continuing ed from the previous 2 years, from 23 and 21. And then I would have to get the 10 needed of that licensing cycle, which would take me up to 27, 25, 27. Yeah, it would take me up to 2027 to get that next 10. Does that make sense? So I wouldn't have to make up 25 to then get into it, because that's what a lot of people were doing. They were getting 25 credits, reinstating their license, but they're still in the licensing period. So now they need to get another 10 to make up so they can prove that they have the 10 the next time they get their license. So they're ending up with like 35 credits. Like it's like overkill. So they said you need the 10 from the previous 5 years, right? 2.5 licensing cycle, you just need 10. You just need to pay us one time. You don't have to pay us 2.5 times. And then whatever licensing your cycle you are in, you need to make good on that set of credits. That makes sense? Makes sense. Okay, sure. All right, good. But again, ask because this stuff is so weird. New Jersey gets so bogged down with this stuff. Also, New Jersey recognizes out-of-state CEUs for relicensure. This is not for licensure, meaning that you go, oh, I took a whole bunch of classes in PA. When I redo my New Jersey license, when I was use my Pennsylvania credits for it. Well, unless they are specifically approved for New Jersey, you can't use them. However, if they are, if during that period, that 5 years that you were not licensed, right, in New Jersey, let's say you were licensed in Pennsylvania and you were getting 6 credits per licensing cycle, they would allow you to use those credits to satisfy the 10 that were needed from the previous licensing cycles. That makes sense? So they go, all right, in a reinstatement, since you were working in the funeral industry, although it's not New Jersey, we'll recognize it in this particular case. Just stay on track as you move forward. All right. So lapse more than 5 years. This one, they do not give a specific answer for it. It's weird. Before they said there'd be a mini internship. Makes sense. 3 months to a year, depending on the time, but 25 embalming funeral arrangements. You'd have to retake the jurisprudence exam and the practical exam. But that was all prior to when they changed it in 2019. 2019, they didn't give us an answer. They said, the state board will decide on a case-by-case basis. What does that mean? I don't know. Will they ask if the new 2019 laws or the old laws? They'll ask if they ask any questions on this, it'll definitely be the 2019 laws because it's been long enough that they're in play by now. Now, if you were to take this test in 2019 or 2020, I would say you're just not going to see questions on these particular topics for that very reason that people would come in and complain and say, look, I can show you this. And I didn't realize so it's just changed this year, but it's had 5 years to work its way in. So it'll be based off of the new laws. If you see, I mean, don't get me wrong, all the old laws still count. These are the changes that they made. If you see a question about food in the funeral home, oh yeah, you're allowed to have food in the funeral home. You can't cook it there, but you can absolutely allow it to be served so long as it's food and it's not and drink and it's not alcoholic, then you're absolutely allowed to have it served there. So if you see a question like that, yeah, they would definitely ask you, the post 2019 answers, what they'd be looking for. All right, record keeping. The funeral home files, how long are you supposed to keep them? Remember, that's 7 years, first year being needed immediately if the state board inspector shows up. In 6 years, you had to have those last 6 years of your records. They need to be there. However, they'll give you up to 2 weeks to produce them. So maybe you store them off of the main campus, right? You store them in, I don't know, you rent a place and you store them there and say, oh, you can come back in a week and a half and see them. That's perfectly fine. But 7 years, now what goes into that? And that's where the devil's in the details. You have to keep every funeral file for 7 years. What goes into that? That's like, all right, remember, if you paid for the clergy, that was a cash advance to a clergy person for officiating services. Well, you need to keep track of who that clergy person is and how much was paid them, right? So certain things like that pop up, whereas the family pays them, it doesn't matter. You don't need to keep track of that. You need to keep track of who embalmed, who removed. All of that stuff needs to be stored in a record for 7 years. So if they ask you how long do you need to remember, who officiated the service, that the funeral home did the cash advance for, well, then that's 7 years. If the family paid it, then it's you don't need to keep that, but there's a whole list of those things. Um, Medical records, how long do medical records have to be kept? And remember, this is sort of more of an OSHA thing. And OSHA stuff is all up for fair grab as well. Your training records, if you're sent in for OSHA training, how long does the employer need to keep that? If you have a Sharps injury log for your OSHA, how long does that need to be kept? Itemization. How do you prepare a statement of goods and services with the discount? Because remember, FTC stuff, that's also up for grabs. Remember, like the FTC has one rule regarding like a general price list saying you have to keep it for a year, whereas New Jersey, no, it's much longer. Does anybody remember how long you had to keep it, just the general price list in New Jersey? Anyone?
1 year.
1 year according to the FTC, but now 3 years.
3 years. Yeah.
Yes,
3 years?
3 years, yeah. And that's according to New Jersey. The FTC, though, says 1 year. So remember what test you're taking. If you're taking the national and you see a question like that, they're not going to ask you a New Jersey specific question. But in New Jersey, they're not going to ask you a nationally minded question. You know, how long do you have to keep a GPL? Unless they specify, according to the FTC, how long do you have to keep a GPL? That would be different. But in general, a question about a GPL would be 3 years, you know. I'm surprised. I'm glad that some people remember that because I'm sure there's some people like, oh, somebody answer. Come on, just somebody. I know it's like three, but it could be six. I don't know. It's one of those numbers, right? I think I could pick it out if I had to bank a number. I could pick the right one, you know, so long as three and six weren't in there. Then I had to flip a coin, but you know. Um, but itemization, right? How do you prepare a statement of funeral goods and services with a discount? And I used to screw this up all the time. And this is an FTC thing, but like I said, it is GPL's 3 letters, 3 years. That's a good way to remember that. I am absolutely going to steal that from you, and I'm not giving you credit for it. I'm totally going to claim that I made it up myself. But that's a great way to that's a great way to remember that.
Wow.
I really like that. I'm totally stealing it. Diane, what's your last name?
Maranzano.
Maranzano. If I remember, I will give you credit, but
That's okay.
I'm totally
I just made
stealing
it up right now.
it. I really like that. I love those little tricks though.
That's how you
But
do it.
they do, and those little things, man. And I'm telling you, I remember taking the national and the sciences and watching people put their fingers on their head as they were tracing the bones back. I mean, all of those little things help. Um, So itemization, how do you prepare a statement of funeral goods with a discount? I used to mess this up all the time. I did all sorts of illegal things. I wasn't ripping people off. They were not unethical. They were legal, but they were not unethical. I would write up a statement of funeral goods and services. Somebody wanted, it was just a small memorial service. Like 10 people are coming, but they want to do something at the funeral home. So I'd write it up as a direct cremation and charge them for a memorial service. You're not supposed to do that. You're absolutely not supposed to do that. It's supposed to be the basic services of the funeral director and the staff, the prep or storage of the body, you charge that, transportation of the remains, transport to the crematory, the box used for the alternative container or whatever you're cremating in, et cetera, and so forth. And then you would add a memorial service. And then if you wanted to discount it down, you could. The families I met didn't care. If I could write it up at, I'm making up numbers now, at $2,000 for direct cremation, plus 300 for the crematory, plus I'll say 500 to use the building for a memorial service, then people were fine with it. I should not have written it up that way. And even if you have like like I worked for a funeral home that had a really nice system set up where you would come in and if you wanted like the traditional package and that had nothing to do with merchandise, it was, you know, embalming, dressing, casting, cosmetology, a layout, a night viewing, a day viewing. They did sneak in a hearse and a limousine and everything else, and it brings out to, I don't know, let's say $4,500. And before you took somebody in to look at merchandise that weren't that nice, you're at $4,500 before you look at merchandise. People could understand that, they could follow it, it would help them make better decisions, I think. However, writing it up, I was never supposed to just write like, yeah, you pick package B, 4,500, and plus this casket and this vault fund. I did it all the time. I totally shouldn't have. I admit that I was 100%. I knew I was wrong when I was doing it, but I also was like running out of time. I had another family. I'm not saying that justifies it. It does not. Don't do it like I did it. But what you're supposed to do is write down every chart and then discount it down. They give you a line to discount. You could discount as much as you would like. You know, you can give away if you own the place or manage it or whatever, right? You can give away funerals for $1 if you wanted to. But you know, it's one of those situations where you just need to discount it at the appropriate level. Every statement of funeral goods and services should look identical unless somebody is picking one of the very few options, like a direct cremation or an immediate burial or forwarding of remains. That is just a subset, which is a basic charge. It's part of the basic services of funeral director remains, or I'm sorry, receiving remains is basic portion of the basic, a small portion of the basic um, services for the funeral home and staff, percentage of the transportation costs, et cetera, and so forth. The basic percentage of the basic service fee. I don't know why I couldn't get that out. Um, and everything else is all packaged up, so you're allowed to do that. So if you want a direct cremation charge at $2,500 before cash advance is fine. You're allowed to do that. But if it's anything else other than that, forwarding remains or receiving remains, you're literally supposed to write everything out. So, and again, FTC forms for New Jersey compliance. If anybody needs it, I have the FTC book, and I can take a look right now to see if I have. Actually, let me do this for 1 second here. Let me see if I can give you guys the FTC books. I believe I have it. It's a new computer. But give me 1 second here. Let me see if I can find it, because if I can find the FTC, I'll share that with you. It's FTC. Notes, notes. Give me 1 second here. Let me try one other thing. Computer files, desktop, 5, FTC. No, that's not it. One more second here. FTC compliant with the funeral rule booklet. Here it is. All right, give me 1 second here. I am going to share this with you. Go. Let's see if that'll work. All right, so it looks like it's uploading. So that's a good thing to hold on to, and a good thing to review, because it gives you, and it's also especially good when taking the arts or the sciences. Make somebody grab it and make sure that it does open, because I sort of did it a different way. I want to make sure that I'm not screwing you guys with it. So if there is a problem, it opens. Awesome, thank you. So if there is a question about the one versus the other, right, 1 second here. Ah, there we go. Again, so record keeping, very important. And we'll talk about that a little bit more when we talk about closing a funeral home, because there is a little bit to do about that. Prep room expectations. I have another slide on that. It's a good one to hold on to, but you should know where to look it up yourself. Prep room expectations. What equipment are you supposed to have? What structures are you supposed to have? And what is prohibited? And it's on the next few slides. However, I do have a slide about sort of the zoning issues first. Sorry, why is that not? There we go. So, all right, so the physical requirements of a funeral home, and I just looked this up the other day just to double check it myself, just to make sure nothing had changed. So there's supposed to be a separation, a clear and designated separation between the funeral home and the living establishment. Because a lot of these old funeral homes, and I grew up in one, it was a living establishment upstairs where we lived and opened Christmas presents, had Thanksgiving and all that stuff, right? And downstairs was a funeral home. But there's supposed to be a clear designation, line, a demarcation between the two, right? Never the two shall meet. And basically, what they say is like, look, if it's a rancher or everything is on one level, I know this is not a rancher because this pops up, but if everything is on one level, you just have to have a line. You have to make it clear to us that there is a separation between the house and the actual funeral home. And this is a funeral home that I looked at down in Pennsgrove, and they were like giving it away. I want to say it was like 40,000 or something like that. And this is only, I'll say, 7 years ago or something like that. I just wasn't interested in owning another funeral home and the time that it takes to build a place and everything like. But I was interested in just it would be a fun little adventure. But this place had a separation right here where the funeral home is here, and there's this breaker right here. So, everybody lived on this first floor. This was like a living room right here, and there was a kitchen right behind it, and all that stuff. So it was all on the same floor. So you can have it on the same floor. There has to be a separation, though. Now, another thing that the book talks about, and they don't do a great job of explaining, is let's say that you've got a property that cuts over two lines as far as the municipality has it designed out. It's 125 and 127 Main Street, right? It's such a big property, it takes up two properties, or it absorbed another property at some point. 70 years ago, there used to be a little house there, they bought it, they expanded the business, whatever, it's fine. Um, if you have a prep room somewhere else, and this was a funeral home that I used to work at, it was a beautiful, beautiful funeral home. It was a Frank Vidian funeral home. I believe it's called the Logan Vidian Funeral Home now in Broomall, PA. I worked there for years. I loved that place. It was such a cool place to work. But across this way, you'll see there's this carriage house right here. And the second floor up here is where we did all the embalming. So there's an elevator in the back. We'd bring bodies up. That's where we would prep them. And then we would bring a casketed body back over. Now, if this is two separate, and this is, I believe, two separate lines right here. I believe, actually, I think across the township, if I'm not mistaken. Now, I know this is in Pennsylvania, not New Jersey, so I'm asking you to pretend it's in New Jersey. If there's a line that goes right here where it's 126 and 128, or what I said before, 127 Main Street, 129 Main Street, right? And it just happens to be that there's a line right here that just, if you sat down with the township map and looked, you would see it runs behind it, right? So long as there's no point of distraction between the two, there's not a forest, there's not a huge fence that you can't get through, like a straight solid fence that doesn't have a door or anything like that. There's not a huge solid wall that runs across it. Something that would just completely separate them, then it's okay. If it was completely separated for whatever reason, let's say you bought a beautiful place, but it has a big creek that runs right through the middle of it, and you can't get across it like very easily for whatever reason, then you would have to, if you wanted to have the prep room over here, this building would have to have everything that a funeral home requires. It would have to have a area to lay somebody out. It would have to have proper restrooms. It would have to have a area where you can make arrangements, an area that you can embalm, and the same would be true of this building. It would require two certificates of registration. And that isn't specifically living quarters can be inspected also. Yeah, yes, you're 100% right. Yeah, you're 100% right. Anything that is not specifically your living quarters, they do definitely have the right to inspect. That's a good point, Jack. So if there's an area and you're not 100% sure or whatever, then they are allowed to do that. I had forgotten about that, but they are, like, if you show up and there's I don't know, a back room that you just used for storage, but you didn't tell them that you kept three bodies in there because you've been so busy that things have just been nuts and you normally wouldn't do it, but it's just gonna be for an hour while you make room. These three funerals go out, and it's just you've got so many families in, and it's only gonna be for an hour, and the inspector shows up. And that's not specifically set up to be an area to repose bodies. Yeah, you could find yourself in real hot water at that point. So any area that is not specifically set aside as living quarters, yeah, they can't get through them. They cannot go, or excuse me, they can go through them. Anything that are specifically designated as living quarters, they are not allowed in. But if it doesn't have a designation one way or the other, they are allowed to go into them. Anyhow, back to my point. So you buy this beautiful place, you have a creek running through it. you would need to have that separation between the two, where you'd have to have, the prep room and a viewing room and everything else. And the same is true over here. Now, if you have a walkway across this, so whether that be that stream or a forest or a huge wall or a fence, so long as there's a walkway, a seeable walkway between them, then it's fine. I know this is really dumb stuff, but they make the New Jersey law, they get into such minutia with it that it's just, it's these are the odd things I'm afraid they're going to question you on. And if they don't, I apologize, and we're wasting a lot of time looking at stuff you'll never see again, most likely never think about. But so a little footpath bridge, I'm okay. Yeah, in most cases, yeah. Basically, it just says a point of egress across from the one to the other. They don't specify what it is. Like they don't give you. It has specifically has to be, 4 feet by 2 feet or anything like that. No, they just say you had to have a passageway from one to the other. And again, though, that's why I always say be nice to the inspector if they show up, man. Always, they can always find something. If an inspector shows up, always be nice. If they're going to find you, they're going to find you. But it's one of those deals where it's you can't necessarily talk yourself out of a fine, but you can definitely talk yourself into a fine. So this is the requirements in the building itself, right? I'm not going to go through all of these. You can look at these. This is when we're talking about the prep room, leak-proof trash can, instrument cabinet, disinfectant agents, drainage viscera bucket, embalming table, blah, 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 hydro aspirator, approved vacuum breaker, electric aspirator or other aspirator. Waste sink. Here's the one thing I will point out. Waste sink with a minimum 2-inch drain. I don't know why, but that pops up all the time. So if you have, and I hate the term slop sink, but if you have one, it has to have a minimum of a 2-inch drain. Otherwise, they're afraid that there will be things that get stuck in it and it won't go through. But that 2-inch drain pops up all the time. The rest of these you can look over on your own. One set metal injection tubes, one aneurysm needle or aneurysm hook. Remember, they're the same thing basically. One large stroke car, one small, one scalpel, one pair of scissors, 2 hemostats. It goes on, but it's one of those deals. It's just if you see these, you should be able to pick them out. So it's not a bad idea to look them over. I don't think anybody's ever had to write all of these out. But if you had to pick some out, you should be able to. And I would hope you should, because most of the stuff is just common sense. B on this, all instruments and appliances, used in embalming shall be thoroughly cleansed and disinfected immediately after the conclusion of each individual case. So, as soon as you're done, you should be washing and putting these away. If they show up and you haven't done a prep in 4 days and there's an aneurysm hook with a bunch of dried blood on it, they could fine you for that, and kind of rightfully so. I mean, you wouldn't want. I don't know. It just seems like and I've seen it in prep rooms. I know I've seen it. It's not the way I ever want to see a prep room. It's just not. Wash it, make it nice. Potable water supply, again, all requirements again for a prep room. All owners and managers shall ensure the potable water supply is not open to the danger of contamination from any source. The requirement in above shall be satisfied by the installation by any approved hydroaspirator and such other devices as may be necessary to accomplish the purpose of this rule. Any infraction shall be reported to the board immediately. Their fear is this, that let's say you're in a strip mall. I don't know why you'd have a funeral home in a strip mall, but let's say you do, and you're aspirating somebody, and for some reason, this is why they require the double breakers on a hydro aspirator. For some reason, the breakers go, and everything you're aspirating out of the body goes up into the pipe system, and now it's going through the pipes of the rest of the building. I actually just saw an episode of Quincy. Great show. It's super cheesy. It's from the 70s. It's a medical examiner. It's so stupid, but it's worth watching if you see it on TV. I just saw this happen on an episode of Quincy. So the idea is you've got all this stuff came out of a body, got in the pipes, it's going through everything at this mini mall where your funeral home is for some reason, and they don't want that. So if all of a sudden you are aspirating and it gets kicked back into the sewage system, I'm not just talking about a blocked troll car. I'm talking about it getting back up into the piping system and going completely backwards into the pipe to the point that somebody could drink it. So we're not just talking about like a clogged up trocar or something completely different, or clogged up. And a lot of times you'll stop getting suction because the end is clogged up. You just need to clean it. It's fine. This is if everything you're aspirating goes into the actual water supply, you would need to notify the water department and have something done. I've never heard of this happening, but if it does, you'll know what to do. Burial preparation performed in a separate room. No embalming or other preparation for burial or disposition of dead human bodies shall be performed in any funeral establishment except in a room set aside exclusively and approved by the board for such purpose. So you should be, again, doing everything in the room that you're prepping in. A lot of funeral homes will have a separate room where they dress, casket, and cosmetize, and between you and me and the wall, I don't think it really matters, but you're not technically supposed to. You're really supposed to do things in a separate room. Now, certain funeral homes will have a room set aside for ritualistic washing and dressing, and that's a little bit different. But as far as the regular dressing, casting, and cosmetology, that's a little bit that you're supposed to be doing it all in the same room. You're also not supposed to have anything in the room that is not supposed to be there, meaning you bring a decedent in on a stretcher. You move him off the stretcher onto the table. You're supposed to take the stretcher back out of the prep room. You're not supposed to be storing it there. And the thought there is, let's say you even do it nice. You hang it up on the wall, but you're embalming and some blood or some chemical gets spilled. It's on the side of the stretcher. You clean it off as best you could, but then house call comes on. You go out and you've got a body in there. And you've zipped it up, and the husband of the deceased is so beside himself, he's throwing himself on top of the stretcher. And now he's throwing himself on top of potentially somebody's blood or bodily fluids. You know what I mean? So that's sort of the idea behind it. One time I had somebody talking to the inspector while I was quote unquote looking for files, and I was in the prep room moving chairs out to the backyard because we had just had a really large service followed by a very small service. We had no place to put the chairs. We put them in the prep room. And that's when the inspector showed up. We shouldn't have put them in there to begin with. I totally admit that, but we almost got caught. And like I said, we should have admitted our wrong to the inspector, but we didn't. We just ran them out real quick, and he went about his day, and it was what it was. But nothing else is supposed to be in there. Like we would never store chairs in there. It just happened to be, what it was. Now, FCC price disclosures. New for 2019, the manager may designate an employee, even if they are unlicensed, to provide price information on the phone. If my wife works at a funeral home, she's very good at the public. If the owner goes, look, you got to take all price callers, all price shoppers. You take them, go right ahead. And even though she's not licensed, even if any person that's not licensed can read off of the general price list. They can't sit down and work out a payment plans or design a whole funeral or anything like that, but they can at least read off the general price list. How much is a direct cremation? Okay, it's I'm making numbers up again, $2,300 plus cash advances. Okay, fine. How much would a burial be? Oh, okay. Well, a burial is this, but if you're adding a casket, it's this. If you're adding a embalming, it's this. She's allowed to do that, but she can't sit down with somebody and go through, designing a funeral. So, responding to questions concerning information not on the price list, that shall be referred to a licensee or an intern. And this is one of the things in 2019 they specified. They were like, look, interns are there. They're doing everything licensees should be doing. So they should be able to talk to families about these things. If there's questions about pricing, if you're sitting down and, working out a deal, let's say on a funeral, whatever, an intern is allowed to do that. Now, obviously, like any funeral home, you got to have the boss's blessing if you are cutting a deal, let's say. But whatever, by the law, you're allowed to do it. Multiple ownership disclosure. This is specifically in New Jersey. You'll never see this in Pennsylvania. You may eventually see it in Pennsylvania, but you won't see it on the national. A person who owns 50% or greater interest of this registered mortuary also owns 50% or greater interest in the following registered mortuaries in the state of New Jersey, along with the name of the funeral home and municipality and description enough to identify. New for 2019, that only needs to be on the GPL, right? So only on the GPL. 3 letters, 3 years. That's a damn good way to remember that. But yeah, the this needs to be put on there. The fear being, and it happens occasionally. I know a funeral director over in Haddonfield who he had a funeral home for years. He bought the neighboring funeral home, his competitor. And there was a period of time, I mean, 6 weeks, I'll say, that he left the old name on there. I think most people in town knew that he owned it, but the fear is that they would walk into the first funeral home and say, "How much is a funeral?" And he goes, $7,280. And he goes, "That's nonsense. I won't pay more than $6,900. I'm out of here." And he storms out and goes to a competing funeral home. In the meantime, the first funeral home is called the competing funeral home, who he also owns. It goes, "Yeah, tell him $6,900. He sits down and goes, "Huh? How much for a funeral?" He goes, $6,900. Wow, that's perfect. The exact price I wanted to pay. Wonderful. That's what they're afraid of. So if you own more than one funeral home, you have to disclose it. And it comes down to not just you personally own it, but what is the ownership structure, meaning when at one point I owned 3 funeral homes. I had 40% in one, 40% in another, and 20% in the third. And myself and my business partners, we sat down and said, well, we don't need to put that out there because none of us own more than 50% of any of the funeral homes. No, it doesn't matter. What we owned was 40% of the company that owned the funeral home. So that was a very dumb thing on our part. And it didn't matter to us anyhow. Everybody knew what funeral homes we had, but we generally thought we just didn't feel like we just run off some GPLs. We didn't feel like putting them on there and throwing these away. And ultimately, we did. We're like, we should do it right. What's right? We toss them and created new ones. But as of today, it only needs to be on the general price list. Doesn't need to be on the outer burial container price list or the casket price list. Mortuary issues. This changed in 2019. It used to be it could never be used as a site for recovering, organs or tissues, including DNA, and they've done away with that pretty much altogether. You may collect a lock of hair for a family. You can collect DNA via cheek swab, nail clippings, and/or blood collection. All of this was banned, which was silly. Maybe the site of examination to determine the cause of manner of death, meaning you're allowed to have a private autopsy done. You're always allowed to have a private autopsy done. Always. I remember years ago having them done. But for some reason, you couldn't take a cheek swab or a nail clipping for DNA purposes. And 300 years from now, you can clone somebody or I don't know, whatever they'll do in the future. Food in the mortuary. Again, remember, this was always out. And it's interesting. If we were in class, I'd go around and get each year. Does anybody really like it or does anybody really hate it? Anyone? Anyone hate it? Anyone like it? No, nothing. All right. All right. So I like it myself. I think it's cool. I think it's nice. I think people like to come in, have something in their hands. Add a new aspect. All right, I agree with you, Jack. I think that it's nice if people have a cup of coffee or a donut or something like that, especially in the morning. It's nice. Given if it's in the evening, it can get a bit raucous because people will be breaking out booze, but it is what it is. I'm not saying that's right because it's absolutely not. If you see people with alcohol in the funeral home, you should absolutely tell them it's against the law and escort them out under every condition. That's my standpoint, and I'm sticking to that. It happens. It is what it is. But it was overturned in August of 2019, and at that point, they say you may serve or allow food to be served in the funeral home and non-alcoholic beverages, but you cannot prepare at the funeral home. So it has to be prepared somewhere else. Everyone smokes weed at funerals now. All right. So when you say everyone smokes weed, do you mean people coming in like rolling joints? Because I know there's weird things say like the gummy bear things and stuff, and the parking lot. Yes, really smoking like actual joints, like I'm picturing like Cheech and Chong type things. Wow. All right. Hey man, it happens. It's better than them overdosing on fentanyl or something like that, I suppose. We had that happen on a funeral not too long ago. Somebody went into and there were nobody on the funeral. That we were at a church. They just went in off of, I think, the river line and just collapsed. So, it is what it is. So you shouldn't be serving or allowing to be served marijuana either. We found CBD gummy wrappers in the trash cans. Okay, I believe it. People are strange. But this is overturned as far as food and non-alcoholic beverages are concerned. You may serve or allow to be served food so long as you're not making it at the funeral home, right? Which again, I still like, that's me. If you close a funeral home, right? And there is a whole thing about what do you do if you close a funeral home? Things like covering up the sign, things like that, right? You must show evidence of state board that the EDRS account is closed. You have to prove to them we've shut down our EDRS account. You must inform the state board of a location and individual in charge of the funeral home record. So it's not enough for you to go, well, we're out. Goodbye. You have to give them, okay, well, Brand X down the street, they were our competitor, but they've taken our records. We've told people to call Brand X. They have a death, whatever. We're selling it. It'll be a CVS next month or something like that. And we don't care. They paid us so much money. We're going to go retire and cruise the rest of our lives or whatever, right? That'd be a pretty sweet deal. But anyway, they hand off their records to Brand X Funeral Home, and they're all good to go. Premium records are given within 10 days, correct? They ask a lot of pre-need questions. Yeah, well, it depends on what records you're asking. Pre-need records to whom, under what circumstance?
When closing the funeral home.
Well, when closing a funeral home or within, could you go through them all? No, that's why the statutes and the regs are there. But okay, if you close a funeral home, you have to notify them. And I forget, the audio cut out. Could you repeat, please? I'm not sure what you missed, but the okay, so with pre-need, if you are closing a funeral home or you are going bankrupt, you need to notify them. And I want to say you're right on the 10 days, but double check me on that. So you have to notify them within 10 days. If you are switching funeral homes, if a family calls you up and they want you to switch, there's a certain amount of time, and I want to say that's 10 days as well, but that could be 14 days. I could be wrong on that one. If they want to cash out, you also have a certain amount of time to get it to them. And I'm blanking on how much it is. It's something like, again, it may be 14 days, but double check that. Yeah, 14 days. Yeah. Um, yeah, and again, one of the reasons normally I have my notes here, I can just go, yeah, it's 14 days. But I even after all these years, I still go, wait, how many was it? Anyway, but I believe that's 14 days. Now, if you're dealing with choices, you're not even going to get that option. You just get a letter in the mail saying, hey, John Smith changed his arrangement to, the competitor you don't like, and you're like, son of a. And it is what it is, right? But you have to know those dates. So Jack was saying that he saw a lot of questions about the dates, about pre-need. Now, Jack, was this just about dates or about pre-need in general? And don't give any questions that you saw or anything like that. But what were you saying in general about pre-need or just pre-need in general? All right. Brainy always been a hot topic, so again, definitely focus a lot of your studies on that. Now, I say that, but don't go in there and think you're just going to see pre-need. I've had students come out and say, I took it a second time, didn't see, I saw two questions that were the same, and the rest were completely different. So don't go in there thinking you're going to see everything on pre-need, right? And if you took it before and you didn't see anything on pre-need, all right, maybe you'll see some pre-need. I don't know, but again, they do randomize it. So anyhow, the state board, you must inform the state board a location and an individual in charge of records, and they're in charge of it again for the next 7 years. Again, with the first year available immediately, and another 6 within 2 weeks. That same rule that they show up anything you did 1 year ago in this past year, you need to have for them immediately, within the next 5 minutes, however long it takes to get a record out of the cabinet, to going, well, come back in a fortnight and I'll give it to you then. So interns and intern regulations. So things you need to know and things you already know most likely. Preceptor qualifications. You have to be licensed for at least 2 years. This was changed in 2019 as well with the as far as if they have an arrest, and we'll get to that. How many interns can they have? Each licensee may only have one intern. A funeral home may have two interns, no more. And that makes no sense to me. The minimum amount of funerals that a funeral home can do to have an intern is 25 a year, and that is excluding stillbirths. And so the idea goes back to when it was 75 funerals and 75 embalmings. And the feeling was if you got out of high school and you're going into the funeral business and your parents own the place, it used to be like 90 some odd percent legacy, right? And so you would get done and you would do your 60 credits, which would take 2 years. And then you would do the funeral program, and that would take 1 year as well. During that time, if you did those 3 years, you did 25 each, you did every embalming and you directed every funeral, by the end of it, you have gotten all 75. Now, they also do not, if you have two interns, funeral home, then have to do 50 plus calls per year. No, they don't. And that's one of those weird things where you would think that, but they don't. Now, Maddie, you said you have a question. Did you just want to ask it, or is that something you wanted to type me?
I just wanted to ask, I had heard once upon a time that Saul Funeral, I'm just using it as an example,
Yeah.
had 7 or 8 interns. And along with that, I had also heard that say you could have 2 interns, and then for each licensee there had to be X amount of funerals. Was that ever the case once upon a time, or am I?
No,
No.
it's never the
Okay.
case. But Saul's has multiple locations, right? So let's say they have 4 locations. That means they can have eight interns.
Okay.
If you're interning at one location, but the funeral home has 6 locations, you can work at all of them, you know? So you could have a day where you walk in and there's 4 or 5 interns working together. You're like, oh, that seems like a lot of interns, but it is what it is. One intern can only get permission per body. All right, well, that's true. And I've also been told it's not true. I've had students who have done this where they've both worked at a funeral home and they've both counted the same decedent and they never had an issue. Now, it wasn't exact, it wasn't that they did 75 and each of those 75 were identical, but I know of interns that have done more than one. Now, the second caveat to that is obviously doing the practical exam, you'll need more than one body for that. Now, when you say that, Jack, did you catch grief from the state? Did they say they were not going to count one of yours because it showed up on somebody else's report or something? Oh, okay. Okay. You're not saying from a real life, you're not talking about from a real life perspective. You're talking about from what they tell you. Okay, I mistook that. All right, I agree with you there. Yet you're not supposed to take credit for more than one person. I've seen people do it, and I've heard of it happen. That's what I'm saying. You can't copy one to the next, but it does happen, maybe more than I should admit, but not even that I know about it. Not like something like that happens, and they call me up and go, "Hey, guess what I just found out?" Blah blah blah, or whatever it is. But yes, you are supposed to count just the one for your own. So, again, going back to the interns, like I said, you can only have two. And again, if you're doing 1,000 calls, you think they would expand that? It just doesn't make sense. The intern specifics, your time, your cases, and your background, right? The time you can have up to 3 years. Remember, the first 2 years are normally intended for if you need those 60 credits. The cases, the 75, 75, and 25. And you already know this, your background. You have to have the 60 credits, a 2.0 average on that. Internship extension. Remember that third year you get with just a letter, you send it off and boom, you're good. If you fail the state board practical, you have to wait 30 days, you have to repay them, and then you have to take it again. It stinks, and I hope that nobody fails the practical, but it has happened. Now, concurrent intern, this is where it gets weird because they're really strange with their let me find something here. Screen. Oh, wait, here we go. Advanced, maybe it's under that. No, wait, document, whiteboard. Yeah, it's just a plain whiteboard. All right, so this is different than it was before. So let's say that the way that they view it is there's 2 years that you're doing the internship while you're doing the 60 credits, right? And then 1 year while you do mortuary school. This period right here, that is a concurrent internship if you have the internship during that time. I'm gonna write concurrent here, but I'm not real good at it. Right. That's the concurrent internship is if you're doing the 2 years, you're serving an internship, you're working towards your 75, 75, and 25, but you're also working towards your 60 credits. Eraser, there's gotta be a way. Text, there we go. Your 60 credits. So that's to get the old 60 credits. At the conclusion of the 60 credits, when you're entering into that third year, right, your third year, again, most of you don't do it this way, but this is sort of the way that it was drafted. During your third year, it's no longer concurrent. Because by this point, no, wait, pen, no, wait. There we go. By this point, you already have the AQC/MQC, right? The academic qualifying certificate and the mortuary qualifying certificate, right? After your 60 credits, it's all that AQC, and it's the same thing. Academic qualifying certificate and mortuary qualifying certificate are identical, right? Same damn thing. The 60 credits during that time is concurrent. At the conclusion of that, boom, the AQC or MQC is issued. Now, during the concurrent internship, if you don't have any schooling whatsoever, you have an internship, you're doing that initial 60 credits, you are supposed to send a transcript to the state board at the conclusion of each semester as to show that you're taking at least 8 credits per and that you have at least a 2.0 or higher. Right. Once you get that AQC, you no longer need to send them transcripts. They don't care anymore. But you have to, at least you're supposed to. Here again, many people don't. And it's really fallen off ever since the pandemic. But, it is what it is there. All right, questions about that? Because that's. All right, let me close that. Let me share again. And let me get my. Random relevant. If fail JP is only 10 days to appeal, ask to see results from date of receiving results. That's a good question because they don't specify. They just say you have 10 days. Now, they would have to give you the 10 days from the day from when you receive it because how long will it be until they receive it? How long till they send it out? And to give you a little inside baseball, as soon as you're done that test, they go back at the school, they run it through a machine, they have your results in 2 minutes if you're done it, if that long. If they even had to wait for other ones to finish first, right? Boom, it's already done. But those results then need to be mailed off to the state and then back to you. So it takes a little while to get to you. So it'd be 10 days you have to appeal to go see it after you receive it. I don't think they're real good about specifying that, but maybe they are now that I think about it. I just haven't read that particular regulation in a long time. But yeah, I would have to. Yeah, I couldn't see how they would justify it otherwise. Sure thing. All right, everybody can see the whiteboard thing. My awful. All right. Screens. Chat back up. There we go. What is the name of the YouTube channel? It is MCCC Funeral Service Program. So again, that's the concurrent internship, and if you fail that state board practical, which hopefully does not affect anybody. New for interns and preceptors. Again, this is all new stuff, but it's not even that new anymore. It's 5 years ago, but preceptor cannot be convicted of a crime within 5 years, but it has to be a crime related to funeral service or of moral turpitude. So moral turpitude is rape and murder and that type of a thing. But anything having to do with funeral service, if you stole the pre-need money and went to Atlantic City and put it on black and red hit, well, you're sort of screwed there. But if it's or if somebody goes and they, murder somebody, whatever, then yeah, they're not going to let you be a preceptor for the next 5 years. I think that's the least of your problems, but cannot have a revocation, suspension, or surrender of license from any professional board. So you used to be an accountant, but you took all the money, you headed down to Atlantic City. This time you put it on red and black hit. Well, that's not good either, right? So you suspended your license, or your license was suspended, or you surrendered it, or whatever, right? Yeah, they're not going to let you be a preceptor. New for interns preceptors 2019 continued. Intern application is now available on the state's website. It used to be the preceptor would have to request it, and this was a royal pain. You had to send a letter and requesting, because somebody signed themselves up at a funeral home without the funeral home's knowledge, and they said no more of that. The funeral home has to send us a letter. Now you can just go to their website and get it. It just makes more sense. Convictions and arrests, these are also new. Licensees are now required to notify the mortuary board in writing within 30 days upon conviction of any crime, or just like when you sent in, for your intern application, any arrest, summons, indictment, admission, and pretrial intervention, guilty plea, to any violation of law, ordinance, felony, DUI, misdemeanor, disorderly offense in New Jersey or any other jurisdiction. Tickets, speeding tickets, they don't care about, which is fair. Used to be every 2 years when you renewed your license, you'd have to tell them then, because everybody looked forward to the form that month, because you get to see like 2 years of, ooh, who got arrested. It was very, very compelling, because at least one person's name would pop up there. And it wasn't uncommon to see somebody you knew, and you're like, ooh, like Joe got a DUI or something. Like it was nobody should be drinking and driving or anything like that, but it is fun to see that your friends are in trouble. Anyway, but it was one of those deals that you would go and you would read it and gossip about it. Now it's just spread out. It makes more sense if you were involved in a crime and it was involving moral turpitude, let's say, or it was something they want to look into a little bit further. It's best they know as soon as possible. Again, more new stuff for 2019. The state board clarified intern responsibilities, participating in funeral arrangements, preserving, washing, or dispose of human bodies, making funeral arrangements on behalf of any licensed practitioner of mortuary science, meaning that it doesn't just have to be your preceptor. You work in a funeral home and there's 3 licensees. You can work with any of them. Yeah, though your preceptor is signing off on anything and something really goes wrong, it's under their license number, but still you're allowed to work with any licensee. Any licensed practitioner of mortuary science. Quoting prices. You're allowed quoting price when funeral arrangements are being made. You don't just have to sit there and be a board and just write down everything that the director says. You're allowed to actually quote prices and be a part of it and engage in conversation. That's really what they're trying to get out of you. And I always tell the story. When I was a student, I lived in the prep room. That's all I did was embalm. I figured if I can get embalming down, the rest of this is all a piece of cake. Man, arranging is 90 times harder than embalming. I did not anticipate how difficult arranging would be. It's much more rewarding, but man, it can be difficult. That's why they're trying to get you more involved now, just to get you into get you better prepared for it. Intern to an advertisement. If intern in ad or website, and again, social media, remember all the stuff is on the website and social media, all advertising. It contains your website and your social media. If you have a Twitter account, the same thing. If you put out an ad in the New York Times, um, if intern in ad or website, social media to be listed as John Doe is to be listed as John Doe NJ intern registration number, and then whatever that number is. So you have to be listed really the same way that the licensees are. Forms of ownership, your corporate use of manager name and the titles, the sign, etc. And the idea that, okay, yes, you can have a manager, you can have a senior director, you can have an executive director, but you have to pick one and that's it. Where do you need to put the manager name, and how big does it have to be? And does it have to be multiple places? Does it need to be on the sign and right at the front door, or can it be one or the other? Right? I know the answer to that, but that's something I'm hoping you'll look up. Um, and death of an owner, what do you do? And how long do they give you? Anyone take a guess at that one? How long do they give you to
60 days.
you think
60 days.
you think it's 60 day line?
Yeah, 60 days. I'm sure it's 60 days.
All right, you might be right. It's at least 30. And I'm thinking back on I'm confusing myself.
It's 60. I'm right.
All right, all right, all right. I'll take your word for it now, but I'm totally gonna look it up. And if you're wrong, I'm gonna send you an email. What am I gonna do? But yeah, it's longer than it needs to be. I would assume to be like 5 days. But again, I understand that it could be traumatic, blah 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 blah. Sudden death of an owner, that type of a thing. 60 days. That just I'll look it up in a bit. Um, again, new installation. Jack says I think 30 days, 60 days with extension. Not too sure. I have somebody else saying it's 30 days. Yeah, I'm telling you, I think it's 30 days. We'll get back to it. We'll come back to it. Again, all of this stuff is good and you should look it up. And again, when I teach this in class, I look like I know all this stuff. I've totally got it written on all my notes as I go through it. But um, I want to say it's 30. I'm rooting for you, Daylon, but I'm kind of rooting against you. All right. So, wait, someone's putting up a picture here. Hold on. Let's take a look at this picture. Death board within 30 days of the death. Daylon, you got it stuck to you, my friend.
Yeah, I don't know if that's correct, man.
I'm reading it right off of the page. Look, I'm telling you, if you thought it was 60 days and it's and it is 30 days, because 30 days, like you said 60 days, so it's like I don't know. It seems like a lot. I thought it was 30, and I knew it was longer than it should have been. I still think 30 days is longer than it should have been. But if you were thinking it was 60 and it is 30, that could very well save you a question on the test. That's good, man. That's best case scenario right there, right? So again, what do you do with a new installation? Remember, a new installation is a new owner. Let's say you buy a place. What do you have to do when you buy the place? And this is everything from notifying everybody who has a paid pre-need account with you, to if you're changing the if all of a sudden the place is closed down for a period of time, let's say that it's 5 days before you can reopen, what do you have to do during that time, like covering up the sign and things like that? In most cases, it's done beforehand because you're supposed to notify the state board at least 15 days before you sell a place or you buy a place, given it should be longer than that. That should be the absolute last possible amount of time. 15 days seems ridiculous to me. Um, And again, closing the funeral home, we talked about that before. Unlicensed owner, you're absolutely allowed to have an unlicensed owner. The only time you cannot have an unlicensed owner is it cannot be you cannot run it as a proprietorship, meaning that if it's a single owner and they're licensed, they can run it as a proprietorship. They own it. Everything comes out of their personal account. It's very easy to get started, but if you get sued, you get sued for everything. They take your personal holdings as well as your business holdings. An unlicensed owner cannot have that style of ownership because they're not licensed, right? For no other reason. Like, okay, let's say I grew up in the Daly Funeral Home, right? And I think I'm going to say my parents bought it in 1977. 85, he dies. From 77 to 85, it's a proprietorship. It's a Daly Funeral Home. My father, he owns it, he runs it. And the name has to be the same as well. It couldn't have been Jones Funeral Home, right? But it's his name, and he's one licensee there, and it's it. Fine, great. He dies in 1985. My mom owns it. She's a single owner. Her last name is Daly as well, but she wasn't licensed. So she could not own it as a proprietorship for 3 years. In 1988, she was licensed, and if she wanted to make a proprietorship again, she very well could. She was licensed and an owner. So remember, unlicensed people can open funeral homes. And if an unlicensed owner, they just can't own it as a proprietorship if they are the sole owner of it. But there's nothing stopping you from owning a funeral home, although you're not licensed. So pre-need, right? You need a license for it. Signatures on forms, right? Now, these are everything reassuring people. I mean, everything signing the statement of feudal goods and services to actually signing the trust agreement itself, and the explanations that go to family, specifically with the trust versus insurance and what needs to be done with insurance as far as the idea that, let's say somebody pays a premium and they okay, you need to have a disclosure that paying the premium, if there is some underlying mitigating factor, may not pay the entire funeral, meaning that meaning you can't advertise like, oh, well, come on in and open up and if you open up a funeral policy for us today, it'd be half price. Well, I'm just opening up an insurance policy on you and you look pretty sick and you'd be dead probably within a month. What difference? You're going to get it like half off. Like that doesn't work as far as advertising. And you also need, as the insurance agent, if anybody is becoming an insurance agent as well, you do have to disclose to people that they do have a period of time. I want to say it's 72 hours in which they can just cash everything in. And it's all basically laid out there in one of the forms that they need to sign off on. You're not going to need to know the number of the form or anything like that because it doesn't work as specific as Social Security does. Change a funeral home. What are the time? How much time do you have to change a funeral home? Family walks in or you receive a letter from them. We don't want to ever work with you again. And we want to go to Brain Dex down the street. How long does that give you to change it? And again, we discuss this and you normally don't even find out. You normally just get a letter from Choice that's saying, yeah, you're not the funeral director anymore. And, oh, I hate those letters. Pre-need ledger, what needs to be in the pre-need ledger, right? Like the opening date, the amount of money that was in the opening date, who signed for it, how much money has it made since then. Also have disclosure making a commission on which policies. Yes, you do. And if you're, well, that's just with insurance. With insurance, you need to disclose because that's the only way you can make a commission is with insurance. And there is a form that does disclose that you are making a commission off of it. A cancellation fee. Anyway, back to the pre-need ledger. Everything that you need in that, all of that is laid out in the administrative code. Holding on to it, because remember, we're allowed to hold on to this electronically now. That's why they email it to us instead of mailing it to us. Choices used to mail it to us every month. Now let's go, you can keep it electronically. Here you go. It saves us I'm sure it saves them thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars on paper and mailing and just on ink alone. I couldn't imagine how much it saves them. So you'll have to keep all this stuff electronically. A cancellation fee, you cannot have one. It is what it is. You may sit with family for 6 hours. They decide to use someone else. You're screwed. You wasted 6 hours. Sorry, it happens though. So cancellation fee you cannot have, and everything is 100% pre-need trust. Everything goes into the trust or in the insurance policy. You can't keep any of it, and you can't mark anything up, right? Well, our prices are going to go up next month, so let's just raise this up. No, you can't do it. You can't hide funds in there. It's not. It's actually a crime to do so. So trust issues. Remember, if you're using a trust, and most of you are using choices, so this really doesn't matter anyhow. But a trust, you have to have 200 accounts to then become like a master trust. At that point, it flips, and you're allowed to keep 1% of the interest, right? And that is how you pay the people that work for you. If you have 200 accounts, you're going to need somebody to keep an eye on this, to make sure it's invested properly, to make sure that mailings are going out, to make sure people are getting paid when they're supposed to. It's going to take people to do that. So that allows you to take 1% to pay the people. And when you're talking about something, again, not to make it a choices commercial, but they have something like $500 million in there, something like that. Like, oh, 1% of that goes a long way, right? It pays for a lot. So um, commissions. And again, that only goes to insurance that is issued for a funeral, and that has to be newly issued insurance. You have to have a license to even get a commission, but you don't have a license to work with somebody who has insurance. So let's say somebody comes in and they go, we have this insurance policy and dad's going through spend down. What should we do with it? Well, you're not allowed to get a commission on that if you work it for them, because there's a couple ways you can do that. You could set it up so the state of New Jersey is basically the beneficiary on it, and the funeral home is the absolute assignee, meaning that if the person goes on a Medicaid and the state is paying for their medical expenses, which is easily $15,000-$20,000 a month, that adds up so fast, and they're paying for that. They don't want them using this as a tax shelter. And they die and their family is left with $500,000 or something that could have gone to paying their medical bills. So what they say is, okay, you have an insurance policy that big, fine. We'll set it up. The state is the beneficiary, but you are the assignee, the absolute assignee, meaning that the money is paid. I'm sorry, the policy is paid off. And let's say you have $14,000 on your bill. Boom, 14 grand goes to the funeral home. The rest goes to the state of New Jersey. And again, everybody's satisfied with that. And then POD accounts, I don't know if anybody still uses these. I ask normally in class, and I've had one or two students over the years go, yeah, we do this payment on death. You're perfectly allowed to do this. You go down, you write a funeral bill, they go down to the local bank and go, well, we want to create an account, it's POD. And they go, all right, well, you want to make it, $10,000 and pay us this much a week or a month or whatever it is. And when it's all paid off, somebody shows up with a death certificate and we'll pay it. So Cassandra, I see you saying they exist. Do you use them? All right. I have clients that do them. All right. It's sort of one of those things. And there's nothing wrong with it. It's just something you see less and less of.
It's more like for pre-need, obviously, but for people who their accounts at the bank, not necessarily paying off in the trust or anything like that. It's just more so that they have access to the money immediately when the person dies, as
Immediately
opposed to
when someone
in
dies.
associated with the not associated with the trust or with any kind of insurance. It's more just like with the bank accounts. The PODs are available at the bank accounts so that when the person passes, it goes to that person immediately.
And now is this set up? Do people set it up for funeral purposes, or do they just set it up to go,
They
well,
can
I
just
want,
set it up
yeah.
whenever, to be honest with you, like for anything, like I know someone who went on a trip and they were worried, they had crazy during COVID, crazy expectations of what might happen to them. And they
Sure.
were like 50 years old and they just put a POD on there just in case anything happened. That
I
account was immediately accessible so that they could pay things that they needed to, like mortgage,
That
all
makes
the
sense.
things.
That
Yeah,
makes sense. Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. Um, it makes sense from that standpoint. I don't think it makes sense for paying for a funeral, but people did it like this for many years, and
yeah,
this is much more common in the 80s and the early 90s than it is today. But it is what it is.
right.
It doesn't make a difference as far as the funeral home is concerned because we really can't make money on this anyhow. Let's do this. I've got 7:46. Let's take 5 minutes just because my throat is feeling it. And let's pick back up at 7:51 and I'll have us out of here by 8:15 at the absolute latest because I don't want to hold you guys too late anyhow. But give me just a minute here. Let me how do I do this? Wait. Okay, wait, stop. Wait, pause. Screen sharing is pause, but that's not. Resume that. There we go. All right, advertising. So hmm, advertising is straightforward. There is a whole unit in the administrative code on this. And it's like I said, it's pretty straightforward. The manager has to be named in it, and it has to be the name of the name of the funeral business as it is today, not as it will be in the future, not as it was in the past. The Sorry, there we go. Over there, I don't know, something was flickering on my computer, it's catching my eye, but the so like if you are Smith Funeral Home, but you decide I want to be Smith Mortuary or Smith Mortuary or Smith Life Celebration Home or Smith Memorial Home or something like that. It's fine, but you need to change your name with the state before you put it into your advertisements. Even if you're planning on doing it next year, you can't just run a tester and go, well, let's just see. No, can't do it. It has to be your name. Manager has to be named, and however you have them specified, is it the senior director, the executive director, or the manager, right? You have to specify one of the three, and their number obviously has to be on there. Now, the only thing this does not include is the municipality is in small novelty items. This is like pens and things like that. I had an uncle who used to make golf tees. He would golf a lot, and it just said Bud Funeral Home, Woodbury, New Jersey, and he would go out to the country club and just take a whole bunch of them, throw them out on the I don't golf. I don't know what it's called. The tee box, I'll call it. I think that's right. And he would just throw them all over the place. But that's so small, you can't put everything in there. So it's go, all right, just put the funeral home name, the municipality. That's good enough, right? So if you have pens or something that you're giving out, that's fine. You can just put that on there. If you have an obituary and you run a logo, that falls under the advertising standard. So you have to meet that. And we'll talk about that in a second. If you just run your name in it, it's fine. But if your logo is in there, that changes everything. Testimonials, you're absolutely allowed to have them. They just have to be from somebody you actually did the work for. You can't say, like right now, Jalen Hurts is the Eagles quarterback. He's not doing terribly good this season. I don't think he did great last season either, but that's neither here nor there. But let's say you wanted to say, oh, well, we'll have Jalen Hurts come in and say, yeah, Smith Funeral Home, they're the best. You can't do that unless you buried for somebody in his family, which again makes sense. Now, price reductions. Price reductions are weird. You can only advertise them if the price has not been changed in 30 days. So here's what this means. This is a weird one. Let me see if I can get a whiteboard again here real quick. Just a new one. All right, so let's say you sell a casket for $300, right? What just happened there? That $300 would you sell it for? Okay, it's there. And you decide one day you go in, you go, well, I'm just gonna up that to $600. And I'm gonna advertise that. And I'm going to advertise that at 50% off for the next week. You come in, you would normally have to pay $600 for this casket, but I'm offering it to you for only $300. That's why they say you can't like just get deceptive with it. I think they do this with clothing a lot. I don't think this is done in the funeral world a lot. I know my wife has come home with more than one pair of shoes. She's like, well, it was like 150 last week, but now it's only 70. I'm like, oh, yeah, it's a trap. I'm like, come on, you can see this, but she doesn't. It is what it is. I learned not to argue about these things. And so yeah, it's if you decided to do this, if this is the way that you want to run your business, and it doesn't seem terribly bright to me, you would have to you take your $300 casket, mark it up to $600, wait 30 days. And at the end of 30 days, you could then advertise that as I am selling this casket at half off. So it's not even that big of a holdup if you really wanted to do that. Look, we're selling this at half price, although you marked it up to twice the price 31 days ago. That's perfectly legal to do. Perfectly legal to do. You can't just do it Tuesday, you make it 600. Wednesday, you're advertising it at 50% off, although 2 days before is $300. So I hope that makes sense to everyone. So price reductions is an odd one, and one that really does not come up in funeral service very frequently. So an ad in obituary. I did not take this from the Chinuskis on purpose. It just happened to be I was going through the Camden Courier Post and came across one of theirs online and grabbed it, right? This became really big in like '02, '03, '04. I think it was in '06. You don't need to remember when the law was passed, but they did pass a law saying, look, you can't do this. If you're running a whole picture in somebody's ad in an obituary, it's considered an advertisement. There was one that had like a big lighthouse and it said like our bridge across it was we are your bridge across troubled water, something like that. It was really, really involved. And the state board looked at it and said, no, 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 that is an advertisement. If you had in your obit, uh, friends and relatives may call from 7 to 9 at Chinuski Funeral Home, 1100 North Black Horse Pike, or Runnymede from 7 to 9. That's fine. Perfectly fine to do. You just can't have this whole image in there. That's when it becomes an ad. And that's when you have to, number one, pay for it. The funeral home has to pay for that. And number two, it falls under everything that the advertising statute falls under, meaning you need to have the address. You need to have the full manager name. You need to have their license number. All of that needs to be listed. And like I said, most of these places, and there's nothing wrong with it, they'll send in an obit, and the newspaper has already formatted this, so they send them two bills. Whatever the family wrote is $300, and it's $60 for the funeral home to run their ad, or whatever it is. So advertising includes everything you could imagine. Aerial displays. I've never been down the shore and seen like the plane flying by with, Brand X Funeral Home on it. Circulars, handbills, flyers. You got somebody standing on the corner handing these things out. It falls under letters, direct mailers, any other similar item, document, publication, or device used to communicate to the general public or to a specific group. So anything you do. I remember there was a place that uh, they would run a ton of ad on the radio. I'd be listening to what was it, 1210, the big talker or whatever. And it was constant. I would hear the name of this particular funeral home. They'll go on and on and on about it. I never asked them how they did with it, but it must have been effective. I was in a commercial myself. We had a small funeral home in a small town, and there was a guy who lived a block from me, and we made the commercial for next to nothing, and we ran it and like 9 to 11 p.m. on like HGTV and Fox News and the Golf Network and a couple other places. And I actually went into a house and somebody said, "Oh, it's the guy from TV." And it's like, I live a block from you. I'm not like a celebrity. I'm not even like Big Eddie's or something, if somebody remembers that from the 1980s or Crazy Eddie's or whatever it was. Anyhow, but any time that you try and put yourself out in front of a group like that, it falls under an advertisement. New in 2019, all advertising regs was sent to the funeral home website and social media. For the longest time, they just left that out there and said, well, it is what it is. Not a funeral home has a website. And enough had changed in 7 years. So, like, yeah, a website should have all of that. I've been to a bunch of websites that have none of it. I don't call a state board, but it's not a bad idea to look over your website because God knows your competitor might. So it's just good to double check they have that stuff on there. Now your fines, they can be up to and including $10,000 to the first. Now the vast majority of what you see are not that. That's if you really mess up, you get a fine up to 1,000. The second and subsequent would be up to 20,000. So interment, you need to know the depth of burial. And this is all outlined in the again in the administrative code. And is it in the administrative code? I could be wrong. That might be one of the statutes. Actually, I'm pretty sure it's in the administrative code. But the depth of burial with a privately constructed vault is 0. You could have a vault coming out of the ground. It's perfectly legal. They look a little weird, but it's perfectly legal to do. If you do not have a vault of any sort or something, some sort of a protective shell around the casket, then what they say is you have to dig down at least 4 feet to the top of it, which if you think 6 feet down, think of like 2 feet up from the bottom, right? Now it's smaller for children. I'm forgetting what it is. I want to say it's 4 feet, but look that up. I'm almost certain it's 4 feet. Or I'm sorry, excuse me, 3 feet. Yeah, 4 feet from the top, an adult. I think it might be 2 feet with children. Double check it because I don't have it sitting here in front of my notes, but there is a difference between the two. Now, temporary burial. Remember, it can be buried temporarily if they're marked as such at the time, meaning somebody dies and they're building a mausoleum and they want to be put into that mausoleum. That's fine. The mausoleum won't be built for 2 years. Well, you can do this for up to 4 years. And it's just marked at the time and on the death, or excuse me, on the burial permit, it says temporary. And 3.5, 4 years later, whatever it is, and it goes up to 4 years, you can come up and disinter and have them put right into the mausoleum. You do not need to get a disinterment permit. It serves both purposes. Multiple burial, both in the grave and with the casket. Remember, you need agreements. Everybody has to agree to this. And we'll talk about multiple burials here as far as double depth when we're talking about disinterment. But obviously, if you are going down more than one level, you need agreements from the people that are above it. Which normally is not that difficult to get, but it's something that has to be done. And it's something that's outlined in the code. You can't just go and go, wow, I think they'll agree to it later on. But you can bury more than one person in the casket together. And the line is the same as the next of kin line as far as decisions on who can decide. Spouse, number of the adult children, parents, and so forth. However, they tack on to that the deceased. And so the idea is, let's say a mother is giving birth and she's dying while she's giving birth, and she says, I don't think I'm going to make it. And if the child dies, I want us both buried together, and then she dies. Well, she's given permission for that baby to be buried with her. And you probably see it with that more than I think anything else. And the mother and the child are buried together. However, I did have a student who dealt with it was a sad story. It was a couple in their mid-20s and they had this nice house and somebody broke into it and stabbed them both and then stole some money in their car. And then that person overdosed, so they couldn't even catch him and get justice, but he had killed both of them. And they laid them both out in this casket. It was a newlywed couple. And he said it was an enormous casket. And you're allowed to do that so long as everybody in the family, both in that particular case, both families agree. Um, Disinterment with multi-death burials, meaning you are here and that's the third burial. You've got one and two on top of it. You need agreement from one and two before you can get to three, right? You need everybody there to agree to allow them to be removed before and allow them to be disturbed. Think about it. Our laws are designed in a way to keep you in your resting place. They're not designed for you to just be popped out willy-nilly. They're designed to keep you in your place of rest. So they would take them out and have in order to take them out, you need to have agreement of everybody above you because they're going to be disturbed. And remember, consent in New Jersey consists of the spouse and all adult children. While making the determination of where somebody is buried, the spouse has the sole control. Buried, cremated, buried at sea, whatever, if you were going to, I don't know, have them cremated down and shot into space, if you were going to do alkaline hydrolysis or something strange like that, the spouse would have all control. Once somebody's buried, though, the control then shifts, and it's the spouse and all adult children. They all have an equal say in it, which is a strange, strange thing. And this has come up in court cases, and it's a weird, weird thing. But you have to remember they both have to agree on this. Cremation, right? So the crematory, you need a presence of a licensee. Again, restricted during the pandemic, but they've relaxed that. Record keeping. There's a whole section in the regulations of what a cremation needs to keep, or what a crematory rather needs to keep after a cremation. And they need to keep the name of the deceased, the name of the funeral home, the date of the cremation. They need to keep what was the disposition of the cremated remains, meaning were they given back to the funeral home? Were they given to the family? Did they scatter them on the family's behalf? Some crematories do that, but whatever that is. And it goes on from there. But look that up. That's an important one. And how long do they need to keep their records? Another important one. Now, unclaimed cremated remains, you have a year, and then you can do away with cremated remains if you want to. It just has to be done in a respectful manner. However, you have to do your due diligence and you have to make a legitimate effort to contact the next of kin. Meaning you can mail multiple letters to them, and that's what people do. It's a certified letter, and if they haven't received it, maybe send a second one, and you've waited that much time, then you can dispose of them in a proper fashion. You can scatter them in a very scenic area. You can have them buried. You can scatter them at sea. You just can't take them and chuck them in the trash and say, oh, no one else liked you. I don't like you either. Like, you can't do that. You have to do something that's respectful and honorable of them. However, even that's a bit of a risk. And that's a story for another day because you never know. After a year, no, you haven't done it after 10 years. All right, let's do something. After 15, somebody might pop up and say, well, my grandpa's ashes were here. And now you got a situation. So some just hold on to it forever. Now, I doubt you're going to see this, but I included it anyhow. These were all the changes, some of the changes they made in 2019. At the top of the statement of funeral goods and services, they said this statement rather, is subject to change by agreement of both parties, meaning something wrong goes on it. You don't need to rip everything apart. You can sign out, you can initial next to what you messed up, and they can initial next to what they've messed up. And it can be really frustrating to write everything up and you're on the last line and you write the wrong thing, you write it the wrong spot, and it's like, ugh. You write the wrong number, you hit the wrong button on the calculator, and then you realize it as soon as you write it, and it's like, oh, darn it. And if you have like um, a little computer or a tablet, all the easier you can just correct it. But a lot of people don't. You've written it out, and now you got to start over. Now you can just, with that being on there, it gives you a right to go, okay, we just make a little change. They changed the boxes for sex. That's been removed. It's sex has become a little bit more complicated in the past 20 years. So they made it a little more open-ended. Sanitary care without embalming has been changed to other prep of body. Again, nothing major. I doubt you'll see questions on it. I just want to include it. Use of facilities and staff reviewing to visitation has been changed to visitation. Added use of equipment and staff at graveside. They added the line including accompanying accompaniment of remains to the place of final disposition. I don't know why they added that on, but they did. I think most of this is sort of just superfluous, but on the statement, funeral goods and services, receiving and forwarding remains are on different lines. Before it was just on one. I don't know why they switched it up. And then optional package service. If an optional package service is selected, categories 1 through 3 are not applicable. Have been changed to if you select an optional package, see general price list for a list of included services. And the first thing everybody asked was what I brought up earlier. Well, if that's the case, and we're not saying you need to look through categories 1 through 4, can I just put on their memorial service plus, or I'm sorry, direct cremation plus memorial service? No, it doesn't. It still does not allow you to do that. If you want to have a memorial service, you need to write it out with basic services of funeral director and staff, removal, sanitary care of the remains, storage of remains, uh, taking the decedent to the crematory, the alternative container. Everything else has to be included on there. You can discount it down as much as you want, but you have to outline it all. I mean, that was the first thing everybody asked when they saw that. And again, I doubt you'll see this, but again, just including it. Other wording changes, clergy and church was changed to officiant or place of worship. That's fair enough. Newspaper notice to obituary charges. All right. That makes sense. It puts in charges because a lot of people still think obituaries are free and they're just not. The line pallbearers was removed, but you still have a line there. You can still use professional pallbearers. They just took that off because it's not used nearly as much as it was 30 years ago, let's say. And price reduction has been removed altogether because people might pick it up and look at it and go, well, why is price reduction on here? Why didn't I get one? That's going altogether. You can just write price reduction in if you want and reduce it down as much as you like. You're perfectly legal. Like I said, you can give away a funeral for $1 if you want. Perfectly legal. Not a problem. The state doesn't care how much money you make. They just want everything done in an orderly fashion. Miscellaneous. These are odds and ends, right? Where to file a death certificate. You can file it in the municipality where the death occurred, municipality where the funeral home is, or a municipality where disposition is going to take place, whether that be a cemetery or crematory or whatever, right? So those are the 3 municipalities where you can file that. Cost of the permit, and traditionally going back to the day, traditionally the death certificate ended up in the place where the death happened, in the municipality where the death happened, but EDRS has sort of blurred the line on that one. Remember, there's not a county level for death certificates. It's done by the municipality. It's not something done by the county in New Jersey. Cost of the permit is $5, was 15 while they were setting up EDRS, and we said there's no way that's going down to 5. No state has ever dropped a charge or anything, and damn if I was wrong, they dropped down to $5. Renting a funeral home to another. Remember, you can't just rent another funeral home. This is an agreement that needs to be approved by the state board. Everybody does it. Everybody cheats on it. I've done it before. Somebody called me up. Oh, my aunt died. They live near. Ah, fine, whatever. Rent our place. It's fine. Who cares? I've rented from other funeral homes and thought nothing of it. No, you're not supposed to do that. it's supposed to be an agreement specifically between two funeral homes. You can't just have Joe Schmo advertising himself as a funeral director saying, call my cell number and I'll call up Brand X Funeral Home down the street when the death happens. And I almost did this to one of my competitors, somebody who I'm actually very good friends with now. And at one point, he ran ads saying, "Well, if you want to switch your funeral over to me, just give me." And his game plan was, I think he was going to run funerals out of the local church and that type of a thing. And it's like, man, you SOB. I was like, I should call the state. I didn't. I was like, I'm not going to call the state board on the guy. But that's illegal. You can't do that because he was not really representing a funeral home. He was representing himself as a funeral director. You're not allowed to do that. A funeral home is what people call because a funeral home is accountable. A funeral home has a certificate of registration, has a statement of funeral goods and services, has a general price list, has casket price list, out of burial container prices. Everything else is logged into that. It's a part of that funeral home. If you're just Joe Schmo on the street, you're not committed to any of that stuff. And you have to have an agreement sending it up to the state board going, look, I need to borrow this funeral home. And my aunt died and she lived in North Jersey, and this place has allowed me to do that. And 99 times, probably 999 out of 1,000 times. So sure, that's fine. It's not a problem. You can rent another funeral home up to 3 times in a year. Outside of 3 times, you need to they'll go, no, you can't do that anymore. No, it's no good. Um, I'd strike that, strike that, strike that. I could be wrong on that. Give me a second. That might be 5 times. Shoot.
It's 3 times per year.
Is it 3 times? It's 3 times. Yeah, I see it coming up there. You know what it is? It's 5 times as far as if you wanted to go into use a private building. So you can rent another funeral home up to 3 times in a calendar year. If it's going to be longer than that, you have to give them a reason. Like, let's say you walk in and your ceiling has collapsed. And that happened one Monday morning. I walked in and the owner was like, yeah, just pump a call. I don't care. And he got paid because he had insurance. Anyhow, we had family sign off saying I would have spent $17,000 on a funeral here. And the insurance company had to pay him out 17 grand because that's what he would have made that day. And he had interruption insurance. But let's say you have a fire or something like that, and you need to use another funeral home. The state will normally grant you permission to do that. But if you're going to use another funeral home more than 3 times, you need to give them a reason. There's got to be. Now, if you're going to do that much business in an area, there's got to be a reason for it. Now, you can use a private building. Somebody wants to have a viewing and a funeral ceremony in their house, they're perfectly allowed to. Absolutely allowed to. And you're allowed to do that up to 5 times a year. And that's what was screwing me up. So my apologies on that. But I'm glad we got to the bottom of it. So it's always good to have a group together. So you're allowed to do that up to 5 times a year. Outside of 5 times, like, you may write them the state board, well, they just had a lot of tragedy in this family. And they had 4 grandparents, all of which were over 100. And the oldest daughter in the family was actually 87 or something, and then Johnny, who's 19, was killed in a car accident. And if there's some extenuating circumstance, they'll probably go, all right, that's fine. It is what it is. The But you need to give that to the board. You need to explain to them. Otherwise, why are you doing so many funerals out of a private location? Right? It doesn't make sense. Now, completely exempt from this are religious buildings. Now, you can go to a church or a synagogue or a mosque as many times as you want because that's what they're there for, right? They're there for funerals. They're there to serve the members of their flock, right? Then the same is true of fraternal halls being like Masonic hall. I've had so many funerals in Masonic halls over the years, and that's perfectly fine. Again, that's why they're there. It's one of their purposes to provide a space where their members can do this. And the last is any government building. If somebody's laid out, like if somebody's really famous, like when Rosa Parks died, she was laid out in the rotunda. And the same is true of Ronald Reagan. When he died, he was laid out in the rotunda. You have a whole bunch of senators die within a year. It's nothing you can do. It is what it is, and you don't need permission for that at all. One other thing about renting another funeral home before I forget this, you can only mention your funeral home's name in the obituary if the other funeral home is also mentioned. So let me explain that. You've rented a funeral home in North Jersey. You are Smith Funeral Home, and you go up and you rent Brand X Funeral Home. You can't say relatives and friends may call 7 and 9 on Tuesday at Smith Funeral Home, 335 Waterloo Street, North Jersey, New Jersey. I couldn't think of a town in North Jersey quick enough. North Jersey, New Jersey. What you could put is relatives and friends are welcome to call at Brand X Funeral Home in North Jersey, New Jersey, 7 and 9, North Jersey, New Jersey, North Jersey, New Jersey. Arrangements by Smith Funeral Home or arrangements entrusted under the care of Smith Funeral Home or whatever, you're allowed to do that. But you cannot put your funeral home's name in unless you put the other funeral home's name in, because the idea is the local people want to know who is accountable for this funeral. And if they are storing the remains, they're essentially accountable as far as that local community is concerned. That's where you go to see the body, right? Receiving vault, something you will never see in your career. When I first saw what this was, in panic, I searched everywhere for something on it. I called up my predecessor. I said, Mr. Smith, what on earth is a receiving vault? He goes, oh, I saw one once early in my career. He was licensed in 72, I want to say. He was like, yeah, early in my career. What this is years and years and years ago when it was too cold, they couldn't dig in the ground. What they would do was they would basically create these receiving vaults, and that's where you would hold casketed bodies in January and February, part of March, and as soon as the ground thawed out, that's when you would open it. These are so rarely used in New Jersey to begin with, but they still exist. And if a cemetery has one, it has to be built either underground and in a way designed to prevent noxious fumes from escaping, or the body has to be embalmed and put into a casket before being put in there. Now, otherwise, if not, if it is an unembalmed body and it goes in there, it has to be buried within 48 hours. Unless, of course, the body's been embalmed or the area is underground and is designed in a way to stop noxious fumes, from prevent them from escaping. You're never going to come across one of these in your career. I highly doubt you will ever have a question on it, but I still want to include it. Another odd one. This only came from about 5 or 6 years ago. Somebody complained they looked in the sleeve of a decedent. They saw tape holding down the plastic. I think it was duct tape or something like that. They put in a complaint from the state board. The state board, with a knee-jerk reaction, said, well, that's it. Every funeral home needs to have clear, white, or flesh-colored adhesive tape. To which everybody said, what the hell is flesh-colored? I said, well, every community can figure that one out on their own. So you need to have clear or white or flesh-colored of some sort in the prep room. It's one of those oddities, man. It's just really one of those oddities. Welfare versus Medicaid, you need to know the amounts. I forget them. I would say 2246. I know it's going up, and I forget what it is. Does anybody remember what it is? It's what it was 2246. I know it's going up. It went up during the pandemic when my wife handles it. I should call her up here. She would know it. 3056. And what does the cemetery get, Diane? Do you remember?
I think it's 718. I could be wrong. 714.
714. Okay, you're both right in there. And how much can the family now contribute? It's still like 15. It was what, 15 at 1570. It's still 1570. They didn't up what they can contribute. Okay. Yeah, I knew that it had gone up. It had been a while since I looked into it. I was actually going to yell down because my wife knows this stuff backwards and forwards. But you have to know those numbers, right? Now, you also have to know the amounts for a stillborn as well as a child that is born that lives 1 minute to 2 weeks. There's a breakdown on all three of those, and you need to know all three sets of numbers. Okay. And there's a certain number the family can contribute, a certain amount that goes to the funeral home, and a certain amount that goes to the cemetery, and all three of them. Oh, thank you. Uh-oh. This is asking me how I want to see this. I'll check it out later. But I'm guessing this has the total in it. I'll download that when we're done. Oh, thank you for posting that. It's too small for me to read, but anybody can grab that. Grab that. It looks like a good study aid. That's a good shot. Thank you. Thank you for that screenshot. And again, it's more than just certain numbers like that. Remember, you have to know how much it costs for you to become an intern. How much does it cost for you to register for the practical exam? You know, all those dumb things they tend to pop you with, and I don't know why. What form do you use? The PA 11 versus the WFNJ 11. PA was public assistance 11. Work first came back that was from the Bush Cheney years. Work first is going to be what was going to replace welfare nationwide. And that's what it means. Work first, New Jersey 11. I've seen, and students have told me they've seen both. In dealing with different counties, I've heard both said. Now remember, whereas it claims submitted is done at a county level. So it's so much easier for me to deal with Burlington County than it is with Camden County. Camden County could be a train wreck and could take easily up to 48 hours for them to get back to you. Whereas Burlington County, if you're nice to them, I called them up and I go, hey, it's John Smith and here's his date of birth and his last address and his social. Oh yeah, he'll qualify. All right, done and done. Like, yeah, it's done at a county level. So emergency burial permit, you don't see this very much anymore. Emergency burial permit was when it was a long holiday, right? And let's say it's Friday afternoon, Thursday night, somebody dies, or 6 in the morning he dies. You can't meet the family till the afternoon. They're Jewish and they want him buried Sunday. And let's say he did die on Thursday, but Friday was a holiday and they want to bury on Sunday. What the hell are you going to do? And it's a Jewish thing. And you're like, you're stuck. They need somebody buried to rush. What do? You get an emergency burial permit, or you would have to go before a judge and you would have to plead the case. And they go, yeah, in most cases, they go, yeah, sure, here's a burial permit. But that's what you used to have to do. Is you would have to go before a justice of the peace to get a burial permit. EDRS has done away with this. In theory, you could still do this. In reality, if you have a signed death certificate, you print the burial permit, everybody's happy. Okay. In reality, if you have a very good relationship with the cemetery, they normally look the other way and go, just give it to us Tuesday. But again, I didn't say that out loud. That's definitely not the way you're supposed to do things. I'm just telling you the way things are in a practical sense. In many cases, don't ever anticipate it out of a cemetery, but I've seen it happen. It's nobody gets hurt in it. You know what I mean? Now there's no person in charge of the cemetery. That means that the funeral director is in charge of it. It means that he needs to file the paperwork in that local municipality. Same way that you normally have to set up like a grave digger and everything else, you're supposed to file that with the local registrar. That sometimes happens, sometimes happens, sometimes it doesn't happen. It is what it is. I'm just telling you what the rules are. Communicable disease, list and reporting. You have 12 hours to report these, and I will show you the communicable diseases here in just a second. You'll probably never see these, but there is a list that you need to be aware of. Now, reporting veterans' death. This is an odd thing, may never happen to you, but here is the scenario. A death happens outside the state. Let's say it happens in Pennsylvania. Let's say, or New York, wherever, it doesn't matter. Let's say Pennsylvania for just the sake of easiness. You go over, you get the body, you bring it back to New Jersey. You embalm, dress, all that stuff. You meet with family. They go, that was a veteran. You go, okay, great. They go, we want to bury in this local cemetery. Oh, the local cemetery where nobody's in charge? That's correct in that cemetery. So you've got a body, died out of state. You're going to a cemetery that nobody's in charge. You go, you had the burial, it's a very nice ceremony, whatever. You were supposed to notify the Veterans Affairs at a county level of the death and the place of burial, right? So you notify the Veteran Affairs at a county level of the death and where the person was interred, right? So that is one of the situations that it is never really going to pop up on you, but I could see it being a question, And I think the reason they do it is a lot of days, like a lot of times on like Veterans Day or Flag Day, they'll go out and they'll put flags on all the graves of veterans. I think that might be what it is. I mean, it's an easy enough way to remember it, but so EDRS, the impact of it, obviously enormous. And I don't think I need to go into EDRS all that much. I mean, the basics of it that, yes, you can get the Reg 34 on it and change death certificates and things like that, but EDRS has just centralized everything. None of you have had the fun of sitting at a doctor's office for an hour and a half, 2 hours, waiting for them to sign a damn piece of paper. I used to work for a funeral director. This old man would be like, take a hearse. I'm like, Mr. Vitti, like, take the hearse. I'm like, all right. Drive the hearse. You'd park it out front. I'm kind of in a hurry. That's why the hearse is out front, is what you would say. And they would get you in and out of there in like 4 minutes. Like, here it is, just go. It always worked. I always felt like a jerk doing it. But anyhow, signatures. You need to know how many signatures go on to a death certificate, right? So as the funeral director, the registrar, the doctor who pronounced or the nurse who pronounced, and then the certifier who certified it, right? Now, these last two could be the same person. You could have a doctor who have certified who pronounced the death and certified the death certificate. They did the same thing together. Time of death, 3:35 p.m., and the cause of death was arteriosclerotic arteries and cancer, and giving the guy all sorts of issues. And Lou Gehrig's, why not? He had Lou Gehrig's as well, right? All these, but whatever, right? He knows all those answers, right? So you would only have three at that point, being that pronouncer and certifier, the funeral director, and the registrar. But technically, it's either three or four, because it could be the registrar, the funeral director, the pronouncer, somebody who just pronounces the death, and the certifier comes in and goes, oh, they, like a day later, they go, oh yeah, they had, whatever, and they sign off on the death certificate. Statement, funerals, goods, and services. The funeral director always has to sign that. And then the person who is in charge of the funeral bill has to sign it. Let's say the neighbor's there with him. He goes, I'll be in charge of it. He can do that. There's no reason he can't. Reason he can't go, I'll be accountable for all of that. And remember, in New Jersey, you can have a contract. It just cannot be on the statement of funeral goods and services. It has to be a separate form altogether. There's nothing wrong with having a contract. But statement of funeral goods and services, anybody can sign. Anybody can sign it. FTC disclosure or disclaimer. Who has to sign that? Nobody. You don't even have to give out an FTC disclosure or disclaimer. Not a bad idea. It's a COA. It's a nice thing to say, hey, I gave you a general price list and an outer burial container price list and a casket price list. The minute you came in, you can throw them in the trash. But would you mind just signing off on this, just saying you received it, and I'll just put it in the file. And if anybody ever asks, there you go. So UAGA, Uniform Anatomical Gift Act, and we've been using more and more. We've been using that crazy table up in the in the room that I still don't know how to say it. Armitage table, Armitage, I'll say, but this thing has, I'll say, 6 bodies in it. Now they're not real; it's digital makeups of them. But to make it happen, what they had to do is take these people. It takes like 6 months to a year, and they basically almost freeze them. They put them in gel, and they'll shave off like the tiniest little bit. And they take that, and they put that, and they digitize it, right? And that's put into a computer. They can another tiny little bit, digitize it, put it on a computer. Another little bit, digitize it. Now this goes through the entire body. So when you're done, you've got every piece of skin, every organ, every tissue. This guy, exactly as he looked in life. You cannot be all the way down here, halfway down him, right? And the family call up and go, oh, we want to have a viewing. We changed our mind. The Uniform Anatomical Gift Act gives the ability for schools to go, no, we're not doing that. Like if a school ever called up and asked for a remains act, we could tell them to go pound sand. We wouldn't, just not something we would do, but we do under the Uniform Anatomical Gift Act. This also allows anybody over the 18 the right to give away their body should they choose to. On victims of crime compensation, again, this is up into the $7,000 mark now. And again, it's just a good thing to know about. It's terrible when you have to use it if somebody has been murdered, but it's good to know about it and what are the basics with it. Medical waste. Remember what is medical waste, what isn't medical waste, and remember that we have to keep track of it, and we have to keep track of it to appease the New Jersey Department, the DEP, Department of Environmental Protection. We're supposed to be keeping track of how much is going down the drain, so that at the end of the year we can ballpark between how large the person was, and how much we aspirated, and how much fluid we used, how much solution we used, how much medical waste we generated. I know a lot of places that cut corners on that one, but we're supposed to be keeping track of all of that, along with the medical waste that's physical medical waste, generated medical waste, wherein it's a towel that's drenched through with blood, it's kicked through with blood. That has to be medical waste. It's devices that come off, medical devices that come off a person. A syringe, a scalpel, it's all medical waste. You just can't put that in with regular waste. And remember, there's that whole, and this is probably more of a national thing, but it's good to know it. There's the cradle to grave responsibility, and that you are responsible for it until it's destroyed. The basic wills terminology. I don't think you're going to see much on that, but it's not a bad idea to go through wills and know who's who with all that good stuff. Any questions about that, let me know, but I'm not going to go through all of the wills stuff here in this at this time of day. But if you have questions about wills or anything like that, feel free to ask it. Reach out to me. Ah, yes, the things that are prohibited. So prohibited embalming compounds: arsenic, lead, mercury, zinc, silver, antimony, chloral, any poisonous alkaloid. Now the statute includes copper and cyanogen. Now this is a dumb thing to include. You're not making embalming fluid, I guarantee. And if you are, more power to you. I don't know. I'm cheap, man, but I'm not that cheap. Um, but it's not like you're whipping up a batch of this stuff out in the bathtub downstairs. I doubt any of you are making this stuff, but for whatever reason, you have to know this. And finding this communicable diseases that you have to call the Department of Health within 12 hours. If you call the Department of Health, I don't think they would know what to do. If you have a body with smallpox, cholera, yellow fever, typhus fever, or plague, you have to notify them within 12 hours. What they would do if you had a body like that, I don't even think they would know what to do. I had a student who her father actually works at school. It's a funeral director and he teaches. And they had a case of I think it was yellow fever. I was like, what'd you do? She's like, oh, we just taped up the box, had him cremated directly. I was like, did you notify the Department of Health? She's like, no, why would we? I was like, okay, I could see that. But I don't think they necessarily know what to do, but you're supposed to notify them within 12 hours. All right, and that is it. So good. Questions, comments, concerns, anyone?
I have a stupid question. Why would the funeral director be responsible for notifying the Department of Health and not like the certifier?
That would make sense. I agree.
Yeah.
I agree 100%. It would make a lot more sense for the hospital to notify them.
Hmm.
It's done, I think, as a fail-safe. The idea that somebody has plague and the doctor and nurse and hospital administration told nobody. Maybe the funeral director will. I think it's just done for that reason and that reason alone. That's why it's not really something that's enforced. I'm not saying to hide it if you have a body with yellow fever or something like that, but it's not really going to come up very often, if at all. But that's a good question. Renew questions. Let's see. Makes sense. All right. All right. Thank you for doing this. You're very welcome. Yes, thank you for this. Yeah, I see a couple people there. I'm guessing you guys are either McAllister or Eastwick, but I'm glad that Cindy got the word out to everybody, and I hope everybody is successful on this thing. Get it done. You have until Friday. You have my email account, my email address. If you have questions about the stuff, reach out to me. on those links on the second page, and again, if you just, I put the links into the chat. Um, if you click on that link, it'll take you right to the statutes and the regulations. Go through them. I know they're long, but review them, review them, review them. Know the dumb things like how much does it cost me to register as an intern, whatever, right? That's the easy stuff. You know that anyhow because you've already paid it. But know all the other dumb stuff. What do you need to have a prep room? The fact that it needs to be a separate room all to itself. It can't be a ladies' room normally, like during viewings, but then, you don't have a viewing going on. Move everything out. We'll embalm a body in here. It'll be fine. Don't worry. It'll air out before the viewing tonight. It'll be fine. Don't worry about it. You can't do things like that, right? Like, so there's a lot there. If you have questions, reach out to me. But good luck to everybody. And if you have a chance, reach out to me and let me know how you did. Hey, you got it. You got it, Madison. All right. So again, I will upload everything to YouTube, MCC Funeral Service Program on YouTube, and this should be there. And I'll put in the description, I'll put in the link to the notes, and I'll put a link to the statutes and the regulations. And you should be good with that. But like I said, if you have questions, reach out to me. I'm always happy to try to track down an answer for you. But try to look up those dates, man. Daylon, you better see a question about that, man. I hope you see a question and I hope you go, but I'm glad I'm getting it right. 30 days, man. 30 days. Take care, all. I hope everyone's well.
Thanks, Mr. Daly.
You got it, man.
Thank you.